Andretti is one of the most legendary names in motorsport. They have been linked to every single motorsport for decades now, and now they want to build their fully fledged Formula 1 team. Now this would not see them buying an existing Formula 1 team and rebranding it, no, this would be building an 11th Formula 1 team from scratch. Now as fans, as sponsors and as drivers, we should all be very excited by this prospect of having two more cars on the grid starting in 2024. But for some reason, the FIA actually seems to be trying to block this deal from happening and keep the 20 car grids that we have today. Now in this video I'm going to tell you my main reasons for why I think that this is the absolute worst thing that Formula 1 can do, and why I think that rejecting an Andretti entry right now could affect the next decade of the sport. Okay, so my first point is that Formula 1 is actually trying to expand into America. So America is a huge market that Formula 1 hasn't been exploring very well, and now we have two full American races and Drive to Survive in order to gather more American fans. Now this plan has been working for the last couple of years, but what better way to get more American fans than to have American teams and drivers in the sport? Now we already have an American team in Haas right now in Formula 1, but Haas has been really struggling over the last couple of years, and I think that the addition of a Russian flag livery over the last 2 years hasn't made them any favors when it comes to gathering American fans, and for a long time now we have seen Haas as a kind of Italian team because they are based in Italy and in England and not really in America. And this combined with our lackluster performance ever since 2018 has meant that it's really been difficult to gather new American fans with Haas on board because the team just hasn't had the proper investment. Now Andretti already have a very big fan base and a very good driver lineup in IndyCar, so it would be very easy for them to create a new brand identity that would be very recognizable by the American public in Formula 1. They would just need to bring some drivers from IndyCar and their liveries from IndyCar, and every single American Formula 1 fan will have in Formula 1 a team, a name and drivers that they recognize and that they probably are already fans of. So this would be a major selling point for Formula 1, and I would think that adding an Andretti team with their IndyCar livery and with IndyCar drivers would mean that Formula 1 would gain much more traction in the American market, and this is exactly what Formula 1 needs. And I think that some of the team principals in Formula 1 are dismissing the Andretti entry, saying that they are going to be a team that is underestimating the challenge of Formula 1, but if you look at how Andretti performs in other motorsports, you see that they don't really underestimate a lot of things. They have very successful teams in every single motorsport that they enter, and I think that unlike teams like HRT or Virgin, they are not underestimating Formula 1 and they are not here for just 1 or 2 years before leaving. If Andretti enters the sport, they are a very exciting long-term prospect that has the potential of opening Formula 1 to the brand new American market. But bringing more American fans is not everything that Andretti can do for the sport right now. So they already announced that were they to enter the sport, they would be using Renault engines. Now this is very good because as you know right now, Alpine is the only team in the grid using Renault engines. Now this is a very big problem because Renault may consider that having a fully fledged engine development program for them to only have one team in Alpine is not very worth it. Now by adding a customer team in Andretti, this would mean that their costs would be severely lessened by the fact that Andretti is buying engines from them, and it would mean that Renault's stance in the sport would be much stronger. This would mean that the Renault group would be unlikely to leave the sport, and in an era where we only have 4 engine manufacturers, we cannot really afford to lose one. And you saw this by Red Bull buying the Honda engines in order to keep 4 engine manufacturers in the sport, that Formula 1 cannot really afford at any cost to lose an engine manufacturer, and by Andretti joining Formula 1 and using the Alpine engine, this would mean that we would have a much higher probability of keeping Alpine and Renault on board. And actually linked to my last point, Formula 1 regulations actually allow for 12 teams in the grid. So why have only 10? By having a brand new American team in the grid, you would be attracting not only American engineers, sponsors, drivers and fans, but you would also be actually opening the door for more junior drivers to enter the sport. Right now Alpine actually has a very big problem of where to put their junior drivers, and this would actually solve it. So they could actually make a deal with Andretti where they would pay less for the engines if they allow one Alpine junior driver to be in their cars, and this way Andretti could have one American driver and one Alpine junior driver, and this would solve a lot of their problems. So if you look at drivers such as Oscar Piastri, they actually have nowhere to go after they won the Formula 2 championship. Now this is a very big problem for Alpine because this happens due to them not having a customer team, and this means that their junior program is pretty much useless and they are risking losing talent to other teams. And this would also facilitate the entry of some very good American talent into Formula 1, such as Colton Herta, Patricia Patricio O'Ward or Logan Sargent. So adding another team would be very good for them to have another place to put their junior drivers and for American drivers to come into the sport, and this would link to all of my previous reasons in order to have a stronger Alpine in the sport and in order to have a stronger American presence. But the main reason is still yet to come. And my last reason, and most importantly, is that Andretti is actually willing to pay the $200 million entry fee to enter Formula 1. Now, I've been against this fee for a long time and I've been vocal about this, but I think that having to pay $200 million to enter a sport is something that you just cannot do if you want more teams. But if a team is willing to pay this fee and is actually willing to pay $200 million to be divided by every single current Formula 1 team, giving yourself a major disadvantage because you could be using those $200 million to build facilities, develop the car, hire people, etc. No, you are paying them to the other teams in order to lessen the blow of another team entering the sport. So they are willing to fulfill this rule, and this is a rule that's been very controversial. But if a new team is willing to pay this, then why not just let them in? What is the consequence? They are a brand new American team that will bring new American drivers and American money, and is willing to pay the $200 million fee to enter the sport as the rules stipulate. So if they are willing to pay this huge fee to enter the sport, I think this means a lot about how serious Andretti is to joining Formula 1 and how serious their long-term commitment is to the sport, because you would not pay $200 million in order to leave the sport just 1 or 2 years after. If you pay that fee, you are in it for the long term. So I think that Andretti joining the sport is one of the biggest opportunities that Formula 1 has had in decades for having a new team, and I just cannot see how Formula 1 can refuse it. And just a little side note, over the next 10 years, Formula 1 is going to have to make the tough decision on whether they are going to keep the current generation of engines or switch to electric, hydrogen or other. Now this will be a very big and crucial decision that can very well make or break the sport. So right now they need to make the sport a stronger place, and by adding new teams you're actually making the sport a very strong place, and having an American team such as Andretti would be increasing that exposure massively. Now I'll have another video exploring this future decision that Formula 1 is going to have, so subscribe if you want to see that. So that's why I think that Formula 1 really needs Andretti to join the sport, and why I think that this would be huge for its market. And you can let me know in the comments down below if you agree with me and what teams you would like to see joining the sport. So in the meantime, that's been it for this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed, and if you did, you can check out my latest video right here, and if you enjoyed, you can also like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel a lot. But in the meantime, that's been it for this video. I'll see you next week with my recap of the Bahrain testing, and until then, goodbye.